The biggest frustration that most business owners face has to do with employees. If you ask people what bothers you the most, it's often employees. And the root cause of that is that you hire employees to produce some kind of output, not to do the work, but to do the results of the work. And that is usually not communicated in enough detail. Sometimes because entrepreneurs are intuitive and not process oriented, so they don't even know what a good job is. They'll go, I know it when I see it. That's not good enough. That's grandma in the kitchen with no recipe makes great food. Not scalable.
We've really aligned, I think, around this idea of results and outputs. Your book is Output Thinking.
Yeah.
Your philosophies are really similar. Maybe can you give us a little background about your journey as a CEO? Like, how did that
Yeah.
evolve?
So it evolved because I didn't want to have a job. I started making money and thought, this is cool. The first profitable business I had was a window cleaning company. And I remember being with the crew on the inside of an office building and looking at a paper on this guy's desk. And it was a requisition for a raise for $2,000. And he had to get it signed off. And I thought, man, if I needed $2,000, this was a year, $2,000 annual. I said, if I needed 2,000 more bucks, I'd just go out and hustle a little bit and get a few more accounts and it would be it. That business ended up getting to where window cleaning, I didn't have these big high-rise equipment kinds of business. It was just really low-rise stuff. And the barrier to entry to that is very low. And so people who are any good tend to be out on their own. And I felt like if this keeps going, I'm going to have 8 or 10 trucks on the road and half of these guys are going to show up drunk and it's not going to be fun. What I ended up learning about myself was the things I loved about business was figuring out the business model, figuring out what worked, how it worked. When it got to be repetitive and just doing the same thing day after day, that's when I got bored. And that led me eventually to partnering up with a buddy of mine who had a video store back in the day when people had video stores. And he had made a deal with an apartment complex. And they said, we'd like to borrow or rent movies by the month. We'd like 50 movies and we'd like to make it a marketing tool so that people could borrow them for free from us and just do it that way. And you change them out every month. So he and I thought that would be a viable business. We partnered up. It didn't take off as fast as we thought. Big shocker there for anybody who's been in a startup. And he didn't have the money to buy me out. I ended up buying him out and went home and thought, oh my God, now what have I done? And that's the fear part that was in the beginning of my book, that terror of it haunts most business owners. And I realized eventually that this was just a business that took a longer selling cycle, and it eventually took off. After a couple of years, this was in Texas, and I was living in Dallas. It was in Plano, Texas, is where the business was.
Did we talk about this already? I'm in Dallas.
Oh, I saw you had a 214 phone number. I don't know if we did. But I'm from the Northeast, as the bumper sticker used to say. I'm a Yankee, but not a damn Yankee, because I went back. And I wanted to get back to the Northeast where there was actually 4 seasons. And it didn't make sense to move the company because our customer base was mostly in the South and Southwest. And I literally had the thought, there are companies with a headquarters in one state and an office in another state. And if they can do it, I can figure it out. Now, the internet is not what it was. There was like AOL maybe at that point. So anyway, I moved, but I couldn't move the company. And the guys would overnight me data tapes. And I had to set up my computer system exactly the same way so that the data made sense and I could tell what was going on. And then I would fly back, and obviously there was phone calls and stuff. And the thing grew. My accountant at one point said, it's growing so fast, you should move to Russia. Just get farther away. See if that's helping. And I owned that company for 25 years. And till obviously we saw the internet coming, we knew movies were going away and all that good stuff. It lasted way longer than anybody thought. In the process of doing that, I got to the point where I wasn't doing a lot of work. At one point, I looked into selling it and talked to a guy who had done some M&As, and he said, you could probably get 3 times EBITDA for it. And I said, I'm not working that hard. I was literally 10, 20 hours a month. And I thought, why would I sell? In 3 years, I'll have the money and the business. So I didn't. And like I said, as the internet changed everything, we ran it into the ground. But when I freed up my time, this is part of this journey piece. Somebody I used to work with called and said, you should look into coaching. You'd be great at it. And I'd never heard of coaching outside of sports. Pointed me to a group that was training coaches. I got into it. I liked it, started coaching other business owners. A number of us founded the International Coach Federation, which I was their fourth president of in 98, I think it was. And
I forgot that you'd mentioned that. That's actually big.
yeah,
They've grown. They've grown
it's grown
considerably.
huge. It's what happened was we started to put a certification in place. At the time, most coaches were independent and had direct relationships with the clients. But it started to take off inside companies where you had people working usually in an HR capacity who were coaches within their organizations. And our certification didn't work for them. So we ended up making a third certification for internal coaches. And after that, the membership really grew. I think it's like 50,000 members worldwide now. What I found, what I was really doing was a combination of coaching and consulting. And here's my working definition. A consultant brings in expertise from the outside. So hire a computer consultant, a tax consultant, a marketing consultant, whatever. A coach helps you maximize the expertise that you have. So if you're a tennis player, a coach will look and go, I think you're leaning on your back foot too much, or I think we need to change your exercise routine or your diet or whatever. And most of the clients that I work with are people that run companies from 2 to 20 million in revenue. I say 10 to 100 employees kind of thing. They have usually not run any other companies. So they need some expertise to say, here's how this works. Here's what's going to break when you go from, say, 25 employees to 50 or 60. And I looked at these companies through this lens of systems and outputs that I wrote about in the book. That helps people understand. And then within that, I operate in a coaching way of saying, look, this is you. This is your baby. It's not just people, numbers in spreadsheets. There's people there. And what is it you want from the company? And how can you grow the company to get what you want? And what I found is that most people there's three things I found that are universal. People want more money. People want time, but usually time away. They're overworked. They're like, I haven't had a vacation in 3 years. I barely get a day off. And there's a reason for that I'll get to in a minute. And the third thing is they want work that they love. They want to be able to do the stuff they really are good at, and it makes a difference. Then there's about 20 other things that are not universal. Some people have a mission they want to do. Some people want to leave a legacy. Some people want to build a community. I was talking to two women partners. One of them said, I want to be famous. Your business can help you do that. The other one said, I don't really care. So your business can do all these things for you besides money, but you have to grow it in a certain way. If you want your business to help you travel, you'll grow it one way. Probably shouldn't open a 24-hour delicatessen. But anyway, so those are the things that I got to working on. And as I started to see these patterns, what I realized is two things. The biggest frustration that most business owners face has to do with employees. If you ask people what bothers you the most, it's often employees. And the root cause of that is that you hire employees to produce some kind of output, not to do the work, but to do the results of the work. And that is usually not communicated in enough detail. Sometimes because entrepreneurs are intuitive and not process oriented, so they don't even know what a good job is. They'll go, I know it when I see it. That's not good enough. That's grandma in the kitchen with no recipe makes great food. Not scalable.
That's a great analogy, man. That's the most fun one I've ever heard.
Yeah,
I
it
haven't used
is.
that before.
And I used to say, you can't build a restaurant with grandmas. And it turns out there is a restaurant in New York City, I think
We
it
saw
is.
the movie about it. Yeah, Nana's.
Yeah, Nana's
Or
thing.
whatever.
So,
I can't remember what the name is, but yeah.
but yeah, they bring in grandmas and they bring in their old recipe. They actually bring in recipes, but whatever. So I can't quite say that anymore. But that's what happens. The other thing that that I've run across is most of my clients at the beginning, when I first started doing this in the late 90s, were people who had either started their company, built it, or often taken over from a parent. And they'd been working at it as they were growing up, and they knew the insides and outsides. But now I've also started to work with people who have bought companies for the first time. This whole entrepreneurship through acquisition, ETA, is now taught in business schools. There's ETA funds and all this. And it's often people from Wall Street, banking, PE, or an MBA program who have now bought a company. They've never run one before. And so they're taking over a company that is working, but they don't know who's a grandma and who's not and whatever. And they often, obviously, for obvious reasons, don't want to keep it at the size that it is. So they have to go in and they want to expand it.
One of the reasons I'm so curious to talk to interesting entrepreneurs like yourself, I think we all know the Google story or the venture capital story. That's less than 10% of 1%, I think, of all entrepreneurs.
Right.
I think,
I call that business porn.
yeah. And it's lovely. There's some wonderful stories there that are very instructive sometimes. I think that the different situations that we encounter and hearing about different people encountering those situations and how they go through it, it can be instructive because people are able to hear, oh, wow, that's this challenge I'm facing as a CEO. And someone else thought of it that way. And even one of my last interviews with Peter Caputa of DataBox, he talked about the same thing. I believe people learn best by hearing different perspectives. It's one of the reasons I like going beyond just one or another business operating system. And I'd love to hear, are there times where you've seen with any of your clients where that test has failed? And as a result, you had to take some actions to maybe document the processes or what have you.
Yeah, it's not that it fails, it's that it's not scalable. And it's not usually appropriate for a new owner to come in because you're at the mercy of a certain key individuals who have all this innate knowledge, but it's not procedural, it's not process oriented. And the part in the book that you probably haven't gotten to yet is I spend the first part of the book talking about what outputs are and how they help you be a better manager. And then I say the things that outputs produce fall into what I call buckets in a company. And every company has the same buckets. There's 7 of them. There's sales, which the output is customers. There's fulfillment. I think in the book I call it serving the customers, is making whatever they buy. Then the other system and buckets support that. So there's people, hiring and managing people. There's information, making sure that everybody's got access to the right information, like APIs and the training of how to do their stuff, documenting SOPs and things. There's money. You have to pay the bills, you have to collect the money, but then there's also the financial analysis of what that money is telling you. There's a bucket I call CAFE, which stands for compliance, administrative support, facilities, etc. It's stuff that if you don't pay attention to, and it can bite you in the butt, but if you do pay attention to, it doesn't really help that much as long as it's okay.
Yeah, it's just it's only a problem if it's not done right.
Yeah, exactly. And I haven't come up with a good word for that yet. But so legal stuff, insurance, all those kinds of things. And then the 7th bucket is growth. If all those things are working, you can grow. And each of these buckets, the systems that produce them, the outputs, as they grow beyond the grandma stage, you can then subdivide these things. So let's take sales. That's the simplest one. At some point, you subdivide it into marketing and closing deals. And you say, okay, the people who do the work that produces leads has a different skill set, a different metric for the ones that take those leads and turn them into paying customers. Now, the mechanism of how that works is very different depending on your industry, but at the highest level, it's always the same. So brick and mortar retail, generating a lead means getting somebody in the store. On a website, it's getting the click, getting them to fill out the form. Some websites, all that stuff happens at once. Other businesses, typically B2B businesses, you get an interest maybe at a trade show, maybe through the website, whatever. And then People have an RFP. You have to come up with a price, a proposal. You have to close a deal. You may have to go do a demo. So all those are different outputs of each of those systems, but they all go to sales. There's a disconnect between what the owner wants and what they are able to do.
Even sometimes the owner is literally, I know of a case. My mother, she had been essentially like the integrator or COO for my father's companies, but she was also an incredible baker. And she had her recipes, but she'd go by feel.
Yeah.
And through a series of events, the deal was, I'll tell the story real quick because it may give us some interesting content. My parents were going to 1898 Opera House in Galveston, Texas, or whatever the year is on it. And there's a place across the street people would eat beforehand. And there was a delay with the meal coming out. So my parents are running late and they had to run out and make arrangements to come get more food or something later, pay the bill. And it was stressful, but they were so nice that my mother brought them stuff that she had baked because she baked. And they tried to hire. And she said, I don't want to hire, but I'll be your supplier. And she started being their supplier. However, she could not scale because she used the grandma technique for baking. And I just remember going, Mom, you got something here because she could cook great, but
Yeah.
she couldn't scale it because just the time that it would take to distill things.
And there's a nuance to it. And I think entrepreneurs get a bad reputation as control freaks. And obviously there are some, but I think more of the reason is that they're very
What is this
intuitive.
control freak you speak of?
And I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
But more often it's because they're very intuitive, but not very process oriented. So they give something to somebody, they say, do this, and they see it going off the rails and they just grab it back rather than say, okay, we need to put a recipe in place, a process that I have checkpoints and I can tell when it's going off the rail in time to fix it. And then eventually I don't even have to tell. I can teach somebody else to tell. And then those systems can get subdivided properly. And
Yeah, it's
that's
something we spend a lot of time on.
yeah. And that's really the nuance of it. And they work in a certain context. I just read an incredible thing about sales. And this guy said, Cedric Chen, and I can't remember the name of his newsletter. It's incredible. He said, people buy not just because of their demographics or their psychographics, who they are and all that, but the situation that they're in. And really good salespeople know how to sense those situations. And that's really a key point, but it's often not taught in sales. It's something that some people stumble upon and some people get good at. But if you can really figure that out, then it can change your marketing. It can change your whole process. And it's really about, I used to say, people don't buy what they need, they buy what they want. And the example I would give is, look, I need to lose weight, but I'm not gonna until I want to. But that's what really matters. I forget where we're going with that. But
Process, I think, is really the thing, and the importance of process and how process can
can be
stop
scalable.
you and hold you back. Yeah, I also think just because I have a background in management consulting where I did a lot of process work, the vendors of process tools complicate process to like an amazing degree. And I think it's about how do we get the repeatable outputs, the repeatable results? How do we come up with a checklist that gives us the confidence that every single time we do a thing, it's controllable and we can get the right outcome. Without that, it's very hard to scale, if not impossible.
And you have to know the context that makes that work. And you have to know what is repeatable and what is not. And I'll give you an example. When I talk about documenting standard operating procedures, I have discovered 3 different kinds they produce different kinds of outputs. So one is what I call the recipe. So it's an exact, put this amount of stuff here, beat it this certain way till it looks like this, put it in the oven at this temperature. It's an algorithm. It's very step by step and it's very repeatable. That's great for anything that's done on a computer. You can do a screenshot and just have somebody talk through, I'm clicking over here to open up this, and here's when I change the client's address and I put this in and blah, blah, blah. It's great for stuff on physical machinery. Here's how you adjust this thing and take a video of it, have somebody do it and talk through. You need this size wrench and whatever. And it's always stuff that is done the same way and ends up the same way. The next step, the next kind is what I call a dance. That's usually where it's involving another person, sales, customer service, I assume healthcare, but I'm not a doctor, so I don't know how that works. You can't really describe step by step how you sell. Or when somebody calls with a problem, you may be able to describe how to solve the problem, but they're usually emotional. And you can't always describe how to get from them the information you need to tell them what to do. What's on the screen? It doesn't work. Well, what does it show? I clicked there and it didn't. What you have to do with a person is dance. What you can do when you're describing that SOP is say, here's the desired outcome. Here's where you start. Here's what you need to look for. Here's what you're trying to get to so that you'll know when you're done. But how you get there, you have to dance. You have to learn how to react to that person and calm them down if they're upset or get the right information from them. So in a sales situation, you could say to somebody, look, you haven't completed this step of the sales process unless you know what their budget is, who the decision makers are. That may take you 3, 4, 5 phone calls. That may take you a meeting. That may take you 2 emails or whatever it is. Once you get that, now we can move on to the next step and use those outputs as the inputs to the next step. So that's the dance SOP. But if you try to move on to that step before that output has been completed, you won't get very far. The third type is a creation where you don't really know what the output looks like, but you do know what the constraints are. So let's take a graphic artist. You want to get a new logo. You don't know what it looks like. Otherwise, you wouldn't need the graphic artist. But you do know the constraints. These are the company colors. This is the font we use. This is the mood that we're going for. I asked AI the other day to draw me an image of a spreadsheet with people trapped in the cells, because that's often what I use with the people from MBA programs is they look at a company as numbers, but there's people in there. And so it came up with an interesting thing of these boxes with spreadsheet people, and they were like almost photographs of people's faces. And I said, now do me one with a cartoon. And so it made cartoons, but each cell had jail bars. It was like a jail cell. And I said, that's okay. Now take the bars off. So by describing the constraints, I got 3 different outputs, but I couldn't have told you ahead of time exactly what those outputs looked like other than the prompt that I used. So that's a creation kind of SOP that you need to document. And each of those will be more or less repeatable doing them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
How do you, when you look at a CEO who's maybe they're struggling, I guess the first thing I'll ask is, what do you see most frequently holding the CEO back?
their own emotional situations, that and or the things that they haven't clarified with their employees, the things that they assumed people would know. And that's a trigger. If you find yourself saying, I would have expected that this would happen, but if you didn't say it, it's probably not going to happen. Or I wouldn't think I would have to tell somebody XYZ.
That
Well,
is one of the most, yeah. Even though I've also heard, about to say heard, I've told them 3 or 4 times already. It's like sometimes you just have to
yeah,
keep repeating. That's hard.
sometimes you do. There was a book probably 15, 20 years ago called It's Okay to Be the Boss. And this was about, I think it was when Gen X, I don't remember all the gens anymore, but I think Gen X was entering the workforce. And there was the typical complaint about young people. They don't like to work. They're lazy. That's been happening since Socrates.
Yeah, no
Uh,
kidding.
but he gave an example of somebody running a coffee shop. And he said, there might be some kid working for you, and you have to tell them every day to wear a clean shirt and show up on time. And if that's what it takes, and you don't want to replace them because everybody else is going to have the same problem, that's what you have to do. And
Yeah,
so,
I think that's going to become even more clear now. We were doing some work, like we use AI heavily, and it has certain behaviors and was having the conversation with someone. It kept coming back saying, "This is now complete." And we're looking at it as, okay, if it says that every time and we can't change that, we can't train that out of it, we have to adjust. That's just what it's gonna say. When it says that, thou shalt not take its word for it. Prove that it's complete or just ignore it and move on. But trying to train that behavior in doesn't help you get the output. What helps
Right.
you get the output is your process just needs to be, okay, we're going to ignore that. Not that you should have to ignore what a human says, but at the same time, yeah, this particular case is exactly what we do with our software team. Like, we all are expected to, I say we, I'm not coding these days, produce tests that show something works.
Yeah.
And if the test doesn't exist, it really, nothing else really matters. Is this tested? Is it testable? I'm going to
Yeah.
start a whole other thread of comments on should you have testing for everything. But, anyways,
Right. Yeah. But what trips people up is our human propensity to elevate what we see or hear to a level of judgment. So I'll give you an example. I was talking to a
that's a
woman.
very well stated way to put it. Yep.
I've dealt with it for a while. I was trying to come up with clear ways to say stuff. Working with a woman who came out of a profession in some government agency. She was managing 20 people and she bought a landscaping company for reasons I don't know, but they did. And she said, I can't believe these people are just not professional. And I said, well, that's a judgment word. What are the behaviors? What do you see, smell, taste, touch, hear that indicates that? She said, well, they show up with dirty uniforms. Some of them drink on the job. They don't show up. They don't put their tools away. I said, great. Those are behaviors. So don't talk about professionalism because it probably means something different to them than it does to you. But you can talk about putting the tools away at the end of the job or cleaning up. And then we know exactly whether they did it or not. And I had this hit home for me a couple of years ago. I had ruptured my Achilles tendon and
Mm.
I couldn't put weight on my foot for several weeks. And I was in this device. It's called an eye walk. And if anybody ruptures your Achilles tendon, I highly encourage it. It's like a peg leg. You stick your knee in it and strap it to yourself, and you can put weight on your knee and your upper leg, not your bottom leg. It's way better than crutches. And it's cool, actually. You're hobbling around on this thing. But I had to go to a conference. And so I had to take 2 flights to get there and 2 flights to get back. And I noticed that they put me up in the front of the plane, and there was a place that they actually put crutches and those kinds of things that so you can sit. And I noticed that the flight attendants, some of them I felt were friendly and some of them I felt were not. And I caught myself. I said, wait a minute, friendly is a judgment. What am I seeing? What's the behavior that I'm noticing? And some of them were smiling. Some of them made better eye contact. Some of them were looking more at their phones during the flight than looking at the people. Some of them were proactive, asking me, could they help me rather than waiting till I asked for help? They were all helpful at that point. And I realized those ones who were doing certain behaviors I felt were friendly. I didn't actually know what they thought of me. They might have thought, oh, this jerk is here. I can't believe I have to do this. But they were smiling and proactive and all. Those are the behaviors we're talking about. And often we talk about culture or values in a company, but we don't define them in terms of behaviors that are visible. And so we don't get the results that we want.
That is another topic near and dear to our hearts here. It's one of the first things we have people do is get very clear
Yeah.
about the behaviors you are going to encourage and discourage. And the nice name for them, or the convenient name, I think, is core values. Different from, like, Patrick Lencioni gave this great talk I saw on actionable core values and make them mean something. That's kind of core value I like. The wall posters are fun and cool, but they're different. This is,
Yeah.
what are the behaviors that we're going to make part of our DNA, and we're going to hire on them, we're going to fire on them, we'll give you feedback on them because they're that important.
And they need to be objective and visible so that when you give somebody feedback or when there's a performance review, if companies do that on a regular basis, that there's no surprises. And I liken that to a swimmer trying out for the Olympics. They get out of the pool, they look up at the clock, they know whether they made it or not. It's
Mhm.
not like the number's good and then they go to the coach and the coach, "Well, your attitude was really not there. You're not." What do you mean? I got the time. If you can't define what people should be doing in objective ways, it's going to be a lot harder to find good people and hold them accountable. Yeah.
Completely agree.
So
I think go ahead.
we can take it another way. So finish the thought.
Oh, me? No, I was
Yeah.
gonna say that there's a good stopping point, but yeah, go for it. We like content.
So I was going to go to your title of How to CEO. And there's a book by William Thorndike called The Outsiders,
I know
where
that
he
book, yeah.
he profiles, I think, 8 CEOs of public companies that he thinks do an incredible job of capital allocation.
I thought you were talking about a different Outsiders, but okay,
Yeah,
this
no,
is one I need to check out. Okay, go ahead,
I
please.
think it's William Thorndike. And at the early part of the book, he says a CEO has 2 jobs. One is to make the company make money, and then to do something with that money. And then the book goes into this capital allocation, the second part of it. I focus on the first part. How do you help the company make money? And for the size of companies that I typically deal with, it's how do you do it in a way that fits the owner's goals, that's that fits with the market that they're in and the things that they can do well. Because slightly different than public companies tend to have more resources and they can do more pivots in certain ways. And also with smaller companies, if they're privately held, often capital allocation means I'm going to take the money out and buy a vacation home. And that's reasonable if that's what you want to do. But getting the company to make money in a way that's scalable, that doesn't depend on individual experts that are hard to replace and hard to scale, that's where the trick is.
Do you see differences in who the CEO has to be at 2,000,000, 8,000,000, 15,000,000? How does the job change?
Yeah, and I hate that you have to put numbers, revenue numbers to it, although you do. A $2 million software company is in a very different place than a $2 million restaurant or construction company.
100%.
The complexity from my point of view has more to do with the number of employees and particularly the number of managers than it does with the revenue. But I still don't know how to put a formula to it. But here's what I will tell you. Back to the outputs. The two main outputs are sales and fulfillment. And those are both customer facing. And in what I call a stage 1 company, the CEO or the owner or the person at the top is very actively involved in those 2 customer facing activities. They often have employees, but the employees help them do that work. The employees don't often have responsibility for those outputs. The next stage is where they have given responsibility for those things. They may have somebody whose job it is to make sure that the fulfillment is done on time, on budget, to the right quality specs, et cetera. And maybe another person for the sales. Their work now is more internally focused on building the structure of the company, the organizational development, designing workflows, getting the right equipment in place, getting the right people. CEOs at that level spend probably 25 to 30% of their time hiring. Even when there's not an opening in the company, they should be out looking for people, building relationships, more of that stuff. That's a big switch from that external focus to that internal focus. And then the next level is, I call a stage 3 company, where they now have somebody who's maybe even a president, or they have P&L responsibility for maybe multiple divisions within the company. And the person at the top, the CEO, is now looking at strategy. They're looking at M&A opportunities. They're building the organization to become a regional or even national or global powerhouse in their industry. And those are 3 different structures of what a CEO needs to do. And it's very different for a different set of skills. And so often in the VC world, you'll find somebody who's a good inventor or has come up with this stuff. They're at the stage 1. And so they'll put money into them. And then many of them can't move into that stage 2 or certainly that stage 3 level of CEO, and that's when they often get replaced.
Yes, definitely seen that.
And the ones that you hear about, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, that can do all that, you hear about them because they're so unique, or they're not unique, but they're so special, so unusual.